Okay, this is the June 17th Operations Committee meeting for the Marin Municipal Water District. And I would like a roll call, please.
Chair Bragman. I'm sorry, Director Bragman.
Here.
Director Gibson.
Here.
Director Kohler.
Here.
Vice Chair Schmidt. Chair Russell.
Here. Okay, I need a motion to adopt the agenda.
Moved. Second.
Roll call, please.
Director Bragman.
Aye.
Director Gibson.
Aye.
Director Kohler.
Aye.
And Chair Russell.
Aye. Okay. Need a motion to approve the minutes, because that we just did.
That was
The agenda. A public comment. Any public comment on items not on the agenda?
There are none.
Okay. Now I need a motion to approve the minutes.
Move approval of the minutes of the April 15th meeting.
Second.
Roll call.
Director Bragman.
Aye.
Director Gibson.
Aye.
Director Kohler.
Aye.
And Chair Russell.
Aye. Okay, item 2, Smith Ranch Saddle Rehabilitation Project.
Hi, good morning, directors. We brought this item to the board about a year ago on doing a condition assessment and evaluation of the tanks. And we've done some additional work on condition assessments as requested. And we have some answers to your questions from last time we met, as well
Okay.
as some updated costs. So I'm going to pass it on to Alex.
Good morning, directors. Alex and I, engineering manager. This morning, presenting the item will be Zach Talbot and Don Barraza from Kennedy Jenks. So Zach, go ahead and take it away.
All right, thank you. I'll share my screen and we've got a short presentation for you all this morning. So are you seeing the full slide?
Presenting the presenter slide.
Oh, hang on. Let me swap. How's that?
That's
There
better.
you go.
Hi, good morning. My name is Zach Talbot. I'm an engineer with the Water District, and this morning we'll be talking about the Smith Saddle Tanks Rehabilitation Project. First, we'll be going over the background of the Smith Saddle tanks, how they function within our system, the consultant's assessment, our updated board report with findings from the floor plate corrosion assessment, our rehabilitation alternatives, a cost analysis, our consultant's recommendation for rehabilitation, as well as project funding. So a little background. These tanks were constructed in 1960 of welded steel. They function together as a system for a total capacity of 10 million gallons of potable water. The interior coating is approximately 62 years old. It's the same age as the tanks. And the exterior coating was recoated in the 80s and is roughly 39 years old. And just for typical industry standard, coatings have a typical life expectancy of about 20 years. So this picture is showing the Smith Saddle tanks and where they are within the system. They are some of the largest tanks within our system. The San Geronimo treatment plant directly supplies water to the Smith Saddle tanks via the North Marin line, which you can see here in blue. And as a result, more potable water goes through the Smith Saddle tanks than any other tanks in the district. So district staff awarded the contract to Kennedy Jenks in February of last year to conduct an interior and exterior assessment, as well as a seismic evaluation of both the tanks. And Kennedy Jenks immediately started work in the winter of last year and did an exterior assessment, as well as an interior assessment of both tanks, one of which was drained completely and was physically entered by the consultant team. At this point, I would like to introduce Don Barraza. He is the lead project engineer for Kennedy Jenks on this project, and he'll walk us through what he found in the assessments. Don has over 35 years of experience in the planning, design, and rehabilitation of potable water tanks, both bolted steel, welded steel, as well as pre-stressed concrete tanks, and is the design engineer of record on over 54 welded steel, bolted steel, and as well as the engineer of record of over 20 pre-stressed concrete tanks. So Don, I'd like to switch it over to you now, and you could walk us through some of these photos and what you found on the condition assessment.
Thank you, Zach. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Loud and clear.
Excellent. And just so I correct one thing, the work that Kennedy Jenks assessment of the tanks was now done over 2 years ago in 2020, and our initial assessment report was done in February of following that into June of 2020. And I know I've met with you before, presented some of those findings, but I will refresh you a little bit to get you up to speed on the findings again. And the work that's been done since the initial report was submitted, involving the floor plate measurements and the update to the costs of the project. And then we can take any questions that you have. So as you can see here in this slide, the tanks had significant areas of damage that included crumbling of rust and chips falling from the roof into the water. There are significant quantities and depths of large-sized chips from the rusted roof plates and roof framing on the floors of the tanks. There's extensive rock damage on the exterior of the tanks from vandals and on the roof of the tanks. And there's been a complete failure of the protective coatings on the underside of the roof plates and the roof framing, with areas of moderate and extensive corrosion and loss of metal. As you can see in these images, again, the rafter to shell connections show severe corrosion in the upper left. The upper right shows coating failure of the girder and web corrosion. The lower left picture shows some extensive corrosion in the center column that supports the roof rafters and that hat plate. And the bottom right shows roof coating damage and rust scales coming off the metal of the roof plates on the underside of the roof plates. You can advance to the next slide. The interior coating assessment is shown on the top two pictures, showed signs of blistering along the tank floor and the shell with coating failure in the water vapor area, and corroded the top portion of the shell. And you can see that extensive corrosion in the upper right photograph there near the very top of the shell. The tank exterior coating also showed signs of failure as evidenced by rust in the locations along various areas around the tanks, and failure of coating adhesion to the tanks, primarily as a result of mold development, as the tank had been overcoated numerous times. And you can see that in the lower left image of the slide here. The tank floors shown in the upper left image are susceptible to corrosion damage from several factors. They have insufficient slope away from the floor plates to the shell plate connections at the base of the tanks on the exterior of the tanks. The oil subgrade and asphalt material of the tanks have eroded significantly, and the shell to floor plate connections on the underside of the tanks have eroded away from the tanks. And the tank shells had significant areas of damage internally. Extensive corrosion beneath the vent sheet metal panels, rock damage, as I've previously mentioned, and the upper 5 feet of the perimeter of the shell have coating failure and bare metal exposure, with even some holes in the shell of the tank. And the coal tar is brittle and has exhibited numerous blister domes. There's extensive corrosion to the roof as a result of poor ventilation, and there's been extensive recommendations made for recoating of the tanks on the interior and the exterior. Why don't you advance to the next slide? One more thing I want to comment on, and that is that even though there's extensive deterioration of the tanks, the assessment of the tanks also had significant issues raised about the seismic vulnerability of the tanks, related to the fact that they are self-anchored tanks, and the annular ring, which provides corrosion and overturning protection for the tanks, is not as thick as it should be. And that would be a strengthened element in the upgrade of the tanks. And the other thing is that the tanks do have bottom piping connections, which are very near to the shell, and they're vulnerable to being severed as a result of uplift of the tanks. And of course, the calculated wave heights in the tanks is insufficient for the design level earthquakes that these two tanks could see, resulting in extensive damage to the underside of the roofs and the columns of the tanks. So now let's talk a little bit about the March 2021 assessment. to the tanks. So in this year, okay. So we did the floor plate measurements. We sent another consultant out because originally when we were in the tanks, we were unable to measure directly the floor plates of the tanks because of the coating over the tanks. We sent another consultant out that had additional equipment that could take floor plate measurements through the coatings on the bottoms of the tank. And we were able to measure within about 2 inches of the shell of the tank, over 90 floor plate measurements. And the maximum metal loss observed on the floor plates was about 10%, 9 to 10%. And the reason we did this is because the original cost estimates had a contingency placed into the estimates to cover replacement of the floor plates. And that was originally at about 50%. And since we've gone back and remeasured the floor plates, we've been able to reduce that contingency in the cost estimate for the replacement of floor plates down to about 10%. And the cost estimate for the floor plates has subsequently dropped from about $148,000 to $62,000. Can you advance to the next slide, please? So as we've indicated, 3 alternatives have been developed for addressing Smith saddle tanks. Alternative number 1 was to strengthen and recoat the 2 existing tanks. And typical work in this option would include removing and installing a new roof framing members, and replacement of the upper section of the roof support columns, replacement of the top shell ring, the top 6 feet of the shell, and installing a new shell ring to raise the tank level for sloshing. It includes some pressure grouting of the voids beneath the tank floor plates identified during the exterior assessment, and installing new safety improvements in the tank for the stairways and guardrails on the tops of the tank. And then includes site improvements, including installing new storm drains around the tanks to improve the drainage of the tanks, which tend to flood when the rains turn heavy, and make access and working around the tanks very difficult, and improvements to the site access road. The second alternative, if you could advance the slide, was to construct 2 new 5 million gallon steel tanks. And the second alternative would involve demolition and off-hauling of the steel, and excavating and constructing a new concrete ring wall foundations with anchorage for the tanks, construction of new steel tanks with inlet and outlet piping, and new storm drains around the tanks, and site access road improvements similar to the first alternative. And the third alternative that was identified was to construct 2 new 5 million gallon pre-stressed concrete tanks to replace the existing steel tanks. And as the steel tanks would have, this would include demolition of the existing steel tanks and off-hauling of that steel, excavating and constructing new concrete floor slabs, footings, tank walls, and pre-stressed reinforcement in concrete with roof access for both of the tanks. And constructing new tank inlet and outlet piping and staircase improvements. The exterior of these tanks could be painted for aesthetic purposes, but exterior coatings are not required, and interior coatings are not required on the concrete surfaces. Can you advance to the next slide, please? So we went back, and since it had been over a year since the original cost estimates were prepared, we updated the 2021 cost to 2022 cost, going through all of the line items in the cost, estimating them, and updating them. And we came up with really costs of about $21 million for alternative number 1, the repair and recoating of the tanks, $30 million for the 2 new welded steel tanks, and just under $24 million for the new pre-stressed concrete tanks. And quotes were received from all of the tank manufacturers for the updated costs. Can you advance to the next slide, Zach, please? Thank you. Because initial construction costs don't tell the whole story, maintenance costs are significant in the evaluation of the recommendation to go forward with. And so we've prepared this slide, which has the numbers in the lower portion of the slide, really, and graphically, those numbers represented in this chart, which shows basically that for the concrete steel tank, we have relatively low maintenance costs on the order of about $100,000 over a 20-year period. And those maintenance costs, when escalated over with a 2% inflation factor over the 100-year life of the tank, will increase the initial construction costs from about $23.4 million to about $24,571 over the 100-year life cycle costs of the tank. More significant, however, are the costs associated with the welded steel tanks. So the welded steel tanks have a cost associated with recoating the tanks every 20 years on the exterior, and then another recoat of the interior of the tanks at about 50 years, and then again, recoating of the exterior of the tanks at 60 and 80 years. And so these additional costs over 100 years added up to about another, say, $24 million in operations costs and maintenance costs on these tanks. So they significantly increase the third option, the first option of repair and recoating of the welded steel tanks over the life cycle to about $45 million.
Yeah, Don, I'd just like to add a few more things too, if we've got a minute too. And yeah, thanks. So an industry standard for tanks, usually less than 1 million gallons, kind of would lean more towards the steel option, tanks ranging about, 300, 400,000 gallons. But once you get up into the 1 million gallon range and bigger, it's more cost effective for the pre-stressed concrete tank option, as I learned this past week at the conference. Basically mostly having to do with the recurrent costs and savings of the maintenance of the tanks themselves. And as you can see, based on the numbers that we have here shown, the updated cost, it's about a 10% difference or cost difference between the rehab option and the pre-stressed tank option, giving us a brand new tank system that's going to be more seismically resilient with a less recurrent maintenance cost over the 100-year life. Just to kind of add to what Don just added here. Just wanted to throw that in there.
Thanks, Alex.
Alex, just a second, Don. The tanks are 62 years old, and how much have we spent on maintenance so far?
The tank maintenance that we spent on the recoatings we've done in the past averaged about 100, and corrosion is about $180,000 roughly, from what I've understood.
Yeah, and see, that's, I mean, you know where I'm coming from. I understand the preferences to go to the concrete tanks, but the problem I have is the 24/7 million seems to be out of proportion with the maintenance program that we employ. Now, maybe this is what we should be doing, but it doesn't appear to be what we are doing. And
I think, Director Russell, it's a good point. I mean, it's the point in terms of should be doing and what we've done, because if we had been maintaining in this frequency, we wouldn't likely have the condition that we have on the Smith Saddle tank. So I think what staff's saying, well, obviously, I guess Alex put it pretty well, that we're looking at the capital costs is pretty close between these two options. So the maintenance is not the, sole financial driver. The capital costs are close, and then you don't have the reoccurring maintenance costs that kind of got us into this condition in the first place.
yeah, but I don't know what that condition is, Ben. That's what I'm really saying. I mean, okay, the floor is 10% corroded. Okay. I mean, that means if it's lasted 62 years and it got a 10% corrosion with a marginal coating, if we put a better coating in, I mean, aren't we going to get the 100 years easily?
Directors, may I provide some input here?
Sure.
So I think there are two main things to take into consideration here. One is that the existing tanks have only been coated once and only on the exterior, and that was near the 20-year mark over a 60-year life of these tanks. And so because they stopped doing any maintenance, coating, assessment, repairs on the interior and the exterior of these tanks, you have virtually lost the entire roof and the top of the shell of these tanks because no money was spent on them. So they have to be completely replaced now because nothing was maintained on them. So I think that's important to take into consideration when you're looking back at what cost you spent on the tanks, because it's reflected now in the condition of these tanks in these areas. And the second thing I think to keep in mind is that you might think that by removing the coatings and putting new coatings on the tanks, somehow you're going to get improved coatings. But actually, the fact is that new coating systems that go on tanks to meet new requirements have to meet VOC requirements for the coatings that can be placed on these tanks. And these new coating systems may not offer you anywhere near the protection that you got out of coating systems that were allowed to be placed on these tanks in the 1960s. The coal tar asphalt coating systems that were placed on these tanks are what have really protected the interiors of these tanks, combined with your cathodic protection system to result in virtually very little loss of metal in the below water levels of these tanks. So keep in mind, as you go forward, coating systems, yes, are new and they're to be placed on there, but coatings today, because of the formulations of the coatings, makes these coatings not going to be something that you can just take away from and not provide maintenance to and not have challenges associated with them.
That's a good comment, but I think I'm a registered corrosion engineer. I do this all the time. And I think that, what you're really talking about is getting a coating that has minimal holidays, and then you rely on the cathodic protection. I got it that the concrete tanks, and as I said the last time when we had this conversation, if this conversation were occurring in 1960, this would be a simple decision. The problem I have is I'm not comfortable with your 100-year cumulative maintenance cost. I understand that that's an ideal number, but it distorts the evaluation so significantly that, there's a lot of assumptions in that. The most important being is what is MMWD going to do about the maintenance? Are we going to spend that much money? I mean, if we only spend $180,000 in 62 years, it sits hard with me to imagine we're going to jump to something that's going to spend $250,000 a year. We've only spent $180,000 in 62 years. You know where I'm coming from. I'm going to stop talking about it. But it's a hard swallow from my end of the equation.
Let me ask a question from a non-engineering point of view. I'm looking at the chart that was in the packet we got, and tell me why this is wrong. One, it seems to me fairly obvious that alternative one really isn't even on the table. I mean, it seems like, again, I'm asking for a correction to my thinking here. Seems like number one is off the table. So then we're down to the two new tanks, alternative one, alternative two. And I look at the number, the construction cost is significantly less. The maintenance cost is significantly less. And the estimated 100-year life cycle cost is less. Why isn't this in the no-brainer category?
Hey, could we go back one slide, Zach, real quick? Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, this is where we kind of wanted probably more to focus on the conversation is if you just throw out the long-term maintenance costs, because we are projecting. You're right, Director. We're projecting and we're guessing in the future. But if we were just look at to rehabilitate what we have today and to get this tank up to current seismic standards and to raise the roof, because we have to take off the whole roof to replace it. So we're going to raise it up probably about 6 to 10 feet so we could have the appropriate sloshing effects and then recode everything. You're looking at roughly 10% difference between rehabilitating what we currently have and building two brand new tanks. And again, these are estimates, and
No, Jack, it's not 10%. It's 30%. 21 million versus 30 million.
No. I'm sorry. You're
It's between the alternative one and the alternative three.
So we're looking at alternative one, which is
Okay,
repair and recoat. And then alternative 3 is 2 pre-stressed concrete tanks.
Right. And just to add something to that, originally when we presented this presentation a year ago, the cost of steel for alternative 1 was around $19 million. So since then to now, because of the increase in cost, I mean, that added about $2 million just in the steel cost alone. So I mean, it's a year from now. I mean, nobody could really predict what the cost is going to be, but it would be safe to assume that it would also increase by the time we get to doing these tanks. So that's another thing to consider, just the inflationary cost of steel compared to what it was about a year ago when we presented this item originally.
of course, you got the same thing, Alex, with concrete, with cement. You know, you can make the same exact argument. You don't really know if your estimate's right on the concrete tank. And I don't agree with you, Jack, that alternative 1 is off the table.
No, I didn't say that's my position. I said, correct that. What's wrong with that?
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that jumps out at me and I don't know what's wrong with it.
Could I ask a couple questions about the floor? Don indicated that the slope of the floor was less than ideal.
So, I'm sorry. What I
Yeah, go ahead.
emphasize with the floor is that the slope of the grading around the tanks, away from the tanks, is not such that it provides for the tank floors to stay in a dry condition. They're basically in a hole. So when it rains heavily, you get water ponding all around the base of the tanks. The asphalt curb that was placed around the tanks to support the floor plates around the tanks has eroded and basically collapsed all around the tanks, leaving voids underneath the floor of the tanks, right near the floor plate to shell connections. We know there are voids underneath the tanks as a result of work being done around the tanks and excavations around the tanks that have left voids under the tanks. We also know that just because of the draining and the filling of the tanks have settled and then sprung back up, leaving voids underneath the tanks. So the underside of the shell plates, of floor plates of the tanks, are basically sitting over big, large holes, large voids underneath the tanks. And that's why we've included costs in there in the repair option, alternative number 1, repair and recoat option, to 1, grout underneath the tanks, 2, repair that asphalt curb, and 3, to strengthen the annular ring, the ring of steel near the weld and connection between the shell plate and the floor plate.
And then as far as the roof on the pre-stressed concrete pre-stressed concrete tank replacement, is that steel or is it concrete?
It's concrete.
So is that subject to the type of damage that's been done over the years to a steel roof, or is it a more robust material that can withstand that kind of abuse?
Yeah, I think it's safe to say that the concrete tank, both the shell of the tank and the roof of the tank, are far more resistant to the rock damage that has been seen on the roof of the tank associated with either the steel tanks or any other type of roof system that could be placed on a steel tank.
And then my recollection was that in analyzing some of the existing coal tar coating on the existing tank, that there was evidence of PCB found in the tank.
That is correct. So alternative number 1, what makes alternative number 1 such an expensive tank to address is because there are PCBs, there are heavy metals in the coal tar interior coatings, and there is lead in the exterior coatings on the existing tanks. And all of these things have to be abated and addressed during removal of the coatings to recoat these tanks.
Yeah. So it just seems to me that replacement of the tanks would be in the best long-term interest of the system. And that's where I'm at. I mean, I think, you know, we've got to look at, when you look at the estimated costs going forward, we're gonna be incurring millions, potentially millions of dollars in maintenance within 20 years if we stick this deal. And I know maybe we don't have to do that, But then we're going to be right back where we are now, which is, dealing with a really defective situation in our most important tanks, in a certain sense, to the extent that they're distributing the most potable water in the system. And it's an important transmission node, and I just think it needs to be brought up to modern standards. So
That's what they're doing, Larry, in the rehabilitation.
Not really.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah,
I
really.
would
Yeah,
say-
really.
I do think option one, we're bringing up to modern standards. However, I think what I'm hearing from Director Bragman and Gibson is really where staff is, which is one way to look at this is for $2 to $3 million, you're getting a brand new tank versus a refurbished 60-year-old tank. And, if you think about it in that terms and then add the maintenance on top of it, because, a refurbished is, it's just never the same. You get your car in an accident, it gets fixed. It's never the same as a new car, the life, the reliability, the maintenance costs. So
But the tanks don't move, Ben. But the tanks aren't a mobile device. Okay.
No,
The reason a car has those problems is different.
Yeah, I'm not trying to be argumentative, Director Russell.
Nor am I.
Yeah, I understand. I'm just saying, if the delta was $10 million or in that ballpark, I think we'd have more of a conundrum here. But with the 2 to 3 million, and I think it is a good point, both perspectives, that this is an estimate likely to change. So it could get closer, the delta, it could get farther. But it's really in the same ballpark. And to get 2 new modern tanks designed with modern standards, seismic reliability, without the maintenance costs, staff does think it's the right direction to go.
And a structure that can withstand the anticipated vandalism that occurs up there. I mean, you're talking about putting on a concrete shell, which would not be subject to the damage that is, even if you replace it with a brand new steel roof, you're still going to have the problems of rock fall or rock throws onto the roof, which damage the roof. This thing, a new one, would withstand that. And, we've got something that's going to last a century. So
Give me the nutshell version of how we build new tanks. Obviously, we got to keep these tanks in operation during the rebuilding process. So they're at the end of the day, they're relocated. Is that right?
Director Gibson, I'll take that one. Yeah, the way we are planning to do this, if either option 1 or 3, would be to take down one tank at a time. So we would isolate the tank from the system, run off of one tank during the low demand time during the winter, completely rehab or demo, reconstruct, and have it back in service by around May. So in either circumstance, that would be the process of doing this, because these tanks are important, as Director Bragman. They're a key integral part of our transmission system. So we can't take them off both at a time. So these would have to be done one at a time over a 2-year time frame.
Okay. And then at the end of the day, when the tanks are relocated, does that relocation present any risks that we're not identifying here? Yeah.
Well, just to clarify, the tanks are not going to be relocated. They're going to be reconstructed on the same site with improvements.
Okay.
What about the third tank, Alex? Where does it go? And could it just be constructed larger?
There's only 2 tanks out there, and there's not really a plan to construct a third tank.
I thought there was in the text. It talks about a third tank, as I recall, unless I misread it.
No.
No, actually, one benefit of the Pine Mountain Tank Project is that these 2 tank systems will balance each other. So we will be gaining some storage in this pressure zone with the Pine Mountain Tank Project.
At one point we were considering looking at all options as far as location. for a potential third tank site, but we never really made that materialize because of the,
Okay,
yeah,
And Alex,
okay,
if,
that's what I read then.
yeah, that must have been it, correct.
and Alex, if we went with the new pre-stressed concrete tanks, we just replaced the pump station out there a year or two ago next to Smith Saddle.
Yeah,
Would that remain operative?
that would still be functional and operative, and it would still be part of the system that after the tanks would be constructed.
Okay, so we don't lose anything by replacing the tanks?
No, that's still integral to the system because it backfeeds the San Geronimo Valley.
Yeah.
On
And is it,
on
Go
Crystal's
ahead, Jack.
point, on Crystal's point that if I understood what you said, Crystal, we'll actually gain storage through the process. We'll have increased storage when we're done with
Well,
that.
certainly with the Pine Mountain Tank project, as you recall, we are lacking in fire flow storage for the Ross Valley area. So in the end, once Pine Mountain tanks are built, we will be gaining some storage capacity.
I see.
Right, but the replacement tanks here would be the same size, 5 million.
That is correct, Director Bregman.
Okay, is there any consideration or value of increasing the storage here to 6 million, something like that?
I think we're physically constrained in the location of where these tanks sit is really kind of the determining factor.
Okay,
And the volume seems to be adequate as it stands right now with the current 10 million gallons. So I don't think there really is a need to increase the size and introduce potentially any other issues.
okay, yeah,
10 million is adequate.
yeah. The site it's actually excavated out of the side of that hill.
Correct.
So there's a very steep drop off around the side of it, and that you have the road around it, which I'm sure is the source of a lot of the rocks and other stuff that's being tossed onto the tanks. So
Correct. Correct. Okay. Okay, I guess we could go to the second slide.
Should we move to recommendation?
Yeah, that's where we were.
Well, we were on the maintenance costs before, and then the next slide is recommendation. Where would you like to pick up, Alex?
Yeah, I think, Don, we had finished kind of discussing the differences here between the two options of pre-stressed and welded steel, correct?
That's correct.
Yeah, so let's go on to the next slide.
So as we've just all discussed, some of the advantages and the disadvantages of the two alternatives, primarily as a result of the performance of constructing a new tank, the overall life cycle cost of constructing a pre-stressed concrete tank, the improvements associated with the materials of a pre-stressed concrete tank, and the ability to design a new concrete tank to meet modern standards. We're recommending that the district proceed with the construction of a pre-stressed concrete tank for the replacement of the two 5 million gallon Smith Saddle tanks.
Thanks, Don. Appreciate it. And staff agrees with KJ's recommendation, and to echo what Ben had spoke to earlier in our discussion, our conclusion could really be boiled down to the costs that we were looking at, the initial capital costs of building the tanks. A new pre-stressed concrete tank is very comparable to rehabilitating what we have right now. And the district would gain the benefit of not having the long-term cyclical costs of maintaining the steel tank. So that's where we kind of boil down the decision to is, at the prices that we're looking at from Don's estimate, they're marginal, they're within 10%. So we really wanted to move forward with concrete tanks because we do gain the advantages down the road, as well as the advantage of today of getting new concrete tanks.
So Zach, the photo shown here is the 11 million gallon Harry Tracy water treatment plant concrete tank that Kennedy Jenks helped design, and it won awards, national awards for its innovation in seismic reliability. And I just want to point out that, the design on a concrete tank for our system would also afford us that increased reliability for seismic.
Yeah.
For seismic risk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yet another advantage.
Yeah, I just want to, not to belabor this, but since I haven't weighed in yet, I really appreciate the conversation and I appreciate the different views on this. My inclination is to go with the staff's recommendation. I think it is compelling. This has been something we've been working on for quite a long time. It seems that the review here has been very thorough. So I just want to thank staff and the consultants, and I'm inclined to want to move this forward with a support recommendation.
Yeah, and actually what we're looking for here is direction on the alternative, because we would move into creating the scope of work for design. It would be very different, deliverables depending on which design we go with. And so our intent would be to come back to the board with a design contract to move alternative 1 forward, or alternative 3
This is
forward.
information only today, am I correct?
That's correct.
This is.
Oh, okay. I thought you were looking for more than that, but okay.
No, we're not. We actually would like to know, how to move forward, because we don't want to spend time on a design contract for an alternative you
Right.
guys aren't gonna, move forward on. So
I guess what I'm saying is I just support the direction that you're going. It's very compelling. It makes a lot of sense to me. And, I'd like to see you guys move forward in the direction that you're proposing.
Yeah, I'd have to rely on recommendation of staff as well, so.
As do I. I just think long-term, middle-term, seismic reliability against vandalism, so many advantages of just going with the newer tank. So I'd really like to see it move forward. That would be the direction that I'd like to see us go.
And all due respect, Larry, I mean, the Golden Gate Bridge is still standing, and that's due to corrosion experts and recoding and the work that's done to maintain it. But in this situation, we do have the option to go with something new and build a new Golden Gate Bridge in a way. And that.
But of course, Crystal, that same option existed in 1960. And the decision was made to go with the steel, with the same constraints that we're talking about existing at that time. So with exactly the same scenario, the decision was made exactly the opposite of what's being recommended here. Now, I understand the value and the advantage, but my problem with it is, and I'm willing to support the new tanks, but I don't want to see us write a blank check. If they come in at 35 million, what happens then? I'm not criticizing Kennedy Jenks's estimate, but my experience is that being an engineer for 40 years, that I depend much more on contractors' estimates than engineers' estimates in going forward.
But we're not there yet, Larry. I mean, can't we let the process go forward? I mean, I'm concerned about derailing this based on an estimate.
Sure, but what I'm saying is I'm going to be jumping up and down if this thing comes in at 35 million. Okay.
Right.
Not
also, as this slide shows, if we actually have a design in hand, in a shovel-ready project, we would have the opportunity to apply for grant funding. So, I mean, getting to the final design is the next step.
To be clear, these are not grants. These are low interest loans. The SRF, the California infrastructure loans, which I'm less familiar with, and WIFIA, those are loans. This is not grants. I think this is all great. These are low interest loans. This is very low cost money. So I applaud you're looking for these, but let's be clear, ratepayer dollars are paying for this. Grants for this kind of thing seem to me few and far between. We're not a disadvantaged community. We're not going to be eligible for those grants, which is where the federal grant money is going. So I don't want to, I just want to caution staff that when we're talking about grants, we should not be putting them in the same category as loans. Loans are just like bonds. They need to be paid back. I absolutely concur that this is the kind of thing that should be debt financed, which will spread the cost into other generations and will make it, much cheaper for the district. So That's a great strategy, but let's not pretend that loans are grants because they're not.
Good point.
They're very advantageous though.
Very
Especially-
advantageous. These are
especially-
fantastic loans, but they are loans.
Yeah,
They are,
no, I
they
get it.
are loans,
But-
and the ratepayers will be
Yeah,
paying for
and,
them.
that is definitely an important distinction. And,
Yeah.
we need to be using, more precise language.
Yeah,
but-
I just don't want people to think that this is going to be free
No,
because
no, but
you know,
since the,
it's not,
since
so-
the prime rate is going to be going up.
yeah. Yeah.
They're
Well,
more
and these are great
advantageous.
loans, right? If we can,
Yeah.
I mean, if we can be in the SRF and with the world, that's awesome. That's, like I just said, very inexpensive money, great for ratepayers, but it is still going to come out of our debt service. So
Correct.
Yeah, so this is the last slide in our presentation. So if there's any additional discussion, we could like to hear it and
Yeah.
more discussion.
I believe we do have at least one public comment. Is that correct, Terry? Is Terry on still?
Yes, we do have one.
Couldn't see you. Thanks.
Yeah. Do we want to go ahead and do that, or do you want to?
Yes, please.
Okay, all right. Mr. Larry Minikes. Go ahead, Mr. Minikes.
Good morning, folks. So during the 1/13/21 10-year planning meeting, this came up. And I wrote a letter on the 5th of January in regard to this whole issue. And I asked, by industry standards, how many paint cycles have our tanks missed? And in terms of age, equipment age, using a sample of a saddle tank that's not been painted since 1974, it's critical for the public to understand that when a tank was, not when a tank was last painted, but how long have the individual parts of the system gone past accepted standards of care and refurbishment? And I'm wondering if we had spent the whatever millions it would have been, 1962, to keep these tanks in shape, would the discussion today be about spending $1 million or $2 million for upkeep rather than replacement? And what's not coming out of this are lessons learned, because we've got other tanks suffering. If ratepayers were to see what these tanks look like, mold, stuff falling off the ceiling, PCBs, I mean, can you imagine? But this is, this is operations. So this is, even though it's a public meeting, not a lot of people paying attention to what's going on here. And has the board fallen short? Boards, I should say, fallen short these decades in upkeep and maintenance, which brings us to the point of what is the mission of this district? And it's to provide clean, high quality water. It's questionable right here, at reasonable cost. And that reasonable cost is really in question here, because what it does is it kind of forces boards to hold back on needed maintenance, because needed maintenance requires increases in rates. And by not increasing rates to cover these maintenance costs, now we're looking at a $20+ million price tag for new tanks that we might not need today. I'm not the expert, but listening to all this, it seems like we have missed out on opportunities. We've got other infrastructure. And really, is it time to bake something into policy that says that we must maintain our infrastructure to industry standards? So there's a lot here. As board watcher, ratepayer, I'm not happy at what I'm listening to at all, because it seems like we just kicked the can down the road for too long, and now we're looking at a huge bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Roger Roberts, please.
I applaud Larry's point and support it. Thank you.
Thank you. There are no further comments.
It is an interesting point, Larry. Just for a point of reference, my company is currently doing an evaluation of the San Jose wastewater treatment plant on exactly that basis for Milpitas and the tributary agencies of what should San Jose have done as opposed to doing capital replacement. The problem is there aren't any really industry standards, Larry. There are guidelines and rub your tummy kind of things, but there's nothing in hard cast that a coating should be replaced at some point in time. If you talk to the coating companies, obviously they're going to tell you, well, you should replace it because they get a chance to sell more coatings. So it's a very, very complex thing. And I don't think it's really fair to point the finger at the board in this situation. I mean, and it's really what my question was about. It's fine to show a cost of $24.7 million for maintenance, but the reality is we spent $160,000, $180,000 in 62 years. That's exactly the point I was getting at. If we're going to do that and make the commitment, that gets to be a very interesting discussion. But just showing it as a number doesn't cause me to have palpitations that it's going to be spent. And the board has really very little to do with this. I mean, it's the setting the capital budget, that end we are involved in, but we have to follow staff and staff's guidance on this. And I think what this really reflects is the change in district management from 1960. The district made a number of decisions which I didn't agree with as a user and even agree with less as an engineer. And that's for things like bolted steel tanks. I am just not a fan of bolted steel tanks. The reason bolted steel tanks get used is they're much cheaper. And that's the part I would say has been the characteristic of MMWD under Seeger and later Dietz Stroh's management. Everything was done with an eye to keep the capital costs to the minimum. So, we're kind of paying the price for that now. As I said, in 1960, the same alternative decision could have been made to go with pre-stressed concrete, but it wasn't, and they went with the steel tank. So, it's sort of the die is cast there. Yes, maintenance could have been done that would have achieved it, but I think the tanks have actually held up fairly well for 62-year life. I mean, yes, it's unfortunate the roof has to come off, but that's just one of those things. But with that said, I thought Ben's argument was the most convincing, that for a 10% surcharge, you get 2 new tanks. Although I do feel a little bit like it's saying your car needs a paint job and we're going to throw the car away. But, I think that argument was the one I found most convincing, as long as the capital cost comes in at 23.4 and not at 35.
Director Russell, if I could add, there's a question there about the number of tanks and number that are overdue. So we have about 75 steel tanks riveted and welded combined, and 31 of them are past the standard of 20 to 25 years for recoating. That's about 40% are past due. And the average age of those that are past due they're about 40 years out since the last recoating. So, of course, if we increase our capital investment over time, we'll catch up. And that's a discussion for future budget and cost of service meetings at our finance meetings.
Couldn't agree more, Crystal, and thank you for that comment.
Yeah.
But the key to that comment is staff has to bring it to us. It's not going to come from the board. And we may say no, and then Larry Minikes is exactly right. It's all on us. But the reality is, I don't think that's the trend that this board has shown, that if staff comes to us with a reasonable proposal, we try to accommodate it within the money constraints.
The other point, it is hard to look back and make conclusions on what could have or should have been decided decades ago. A fair amount of the costs are due to increased knowledge on seismic restraints, on corrosion controls, on coating, on safety of tanks. So a fair amount of the costs we're seeing is just kind of this natural industry standards that evolve over time and lessons learned that do get incorporated into the capital projects going forward.
And,
That's a
you
very
know,
good
also-
point, Ben.
Yeah, we also put a hold on our water system master plan during the drought. And so we've actually re-engaged that effort. And we are looking at, you know, the standards, the new standards for all the factors that Ben just mentioned. And we will be bringing back to the board some recommendations moving forward.
You know, and one
And-
thing this also illustrates is we're going to need to go away from PAYGO. I think I think the capital maintenance fee that's currently being challenged is critical to the financial health of our agency. But I think this does illustrate in bold relief the need to use some debt financing where prudently done for the sake of generational equity and also just keeping our system afloat.
Yeah,
So,
I think that's exactly right. I mean, there needs to always be a balance between operating and and debt, and we need to be really conscious of that. But this is exactly the kind of thing, along with all the other things we've been talking about, that can be debt financed. So I do think, and we've talked about this a little bit, and we shouldn't go too much farther down this road because it's already almost 10:30, but we should bring this back to a finance committee meeting and talk about revisiting the issue of bringing back some sort of bond proposal this year or very soon.
That's a good point. Yeah, and although we may be jumping the gun because this thing isn't designed until 23, and
No, I'm
I
just
think the
saying in
schedule-
general, I'm building on Larry's point about the balance between it's always going to be a bit of a pendulum swing. We felt at one point that we were doing relying too much on debt. We moved more towards PAYGO. Maybe we've gone overly far in that direction in light of when we've talked before. This isn't the first time about
Sure.
the capital projects we need to do. We do want to be talking more seriously about moving our investments in efficiency more into capital. So we should be talking about how those things balance and be getting back to that 10-year financial plan, which should have a significant debt financing component, as well as addressing our needs to bring in more operating revenue.
Good point. Crystal, I think it's important for the board to understand that these other 40 tanks that need to be recoded are likely to be in similar condition to these tanks. And I don't think we're going to be looking at replacement of all 40 tanks.
Oh, no,
Just so
not at
people
all, Director.
are-
Those are much smaller tanks, and we're thinking about $1 million each. And we actually have one coming this winter. The Wolfback Ridge tank recoding project will be coming to you for this winter's work.
And I just, with all due respect, I mean, I very much appreciate the public comments, and particularly these commenters who are always constructive and productive in their interactions with the board. But I just have to say this morning, I couldn't disagree more with the comment that this board has been negligent on investing in maintenance. I think that's utterly unfair and incongruous with the facts. When Larry Russell and I joined this board, there'd been a long period of not raising rates, and we put into place, the management at that time and the board, a very different approach to maintenance. So, in that period of time, which has been, a long time now, we have invested intensively and consistently in replacing and upgrading tanks and pipes and mains and treatment plants. And there's always more you can do. But the idea that this has been, we haven't been investing in our infrastructure, I just think is dead wrong. And I think anybody who's following the district knows that to be the case. You can always say you should do more. There's always going to be more to do. But I have to say I'm somewhat offended by the idea that this board, the board that is here today, has not taken these issues seriously and has not invested. I think that's just dead wrong. And I think those commenters need to rethink those comments and apologize.
okay,
Okay.
so at the end of the day, do we have direction for staff to move forward?
Yeah, I think we,
That's what we heard.
Okay, just want to make sure. Thank you.
Okay. So, number 3, fire flow improvement program.
Hi, good morning, directors. This morning, Hagar, our assistant engineer, will be presenting this item. Go ahead, Hagar.
Okay, good morning, directors. I am Hagar Nagash, Assistant Engineer and Design. This morning, I'm here to present the Tree Haven Fire Flow Improvement Program Pipeline Replacement Project. The project is located along Alpine Street, Sherrard Lane, Echo Place, Fifth Avenue, J Street, Forbes Avenue, Tree Haven Drive, Caladon Park Road, and El Cerrito Avenue, all within the city of San Rafael. This project will approximately install 7,910 feet of 8-inch, 6-inch, and 4-inch pipes, along with all the appurtenances to replace the old leak-prone, undersized, fire flow deficient piping installed as early as 1927 as part of the district's fire flow improvement program. My engineer's estimate for this project is $2,471,000 and is scheduled to last 190 days with the completion date of January 25, 2023. District will receive an open bids for this project on June 23rd, 28th. If the documents are acceptable, staff will make the recommendation at a future regulatory scheduled board meeting for contract award. The staff recommended action is for review and referral to the board with the operations committee recommendation to the process with this project.
Thank you. These streets look very narrow. I presume they're going to be closed completely while the construction is going on. Have we got a plan for how we're going to deal with the residents?
Yes, we've already been doing public outreach to all the residents out there well in advance. And it's going to be part of the contractor to kind of manage the traffic control on an intermittent basis and obviously never block people during construction. So that way people have access to and from their house throughout the duration of the project. And absolutely correct, Director Russell, some of these streets are pretty narrow.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the map, Alex.
Yeah.
And obviously they need to be replaced. I mean, 1943 2-inch galvanized pipe, it's kind of an interesting situation. Any other comments?
I just have a question. How are fire flow projects prioritized? Is there a conversation between the district and the fire chiefs, or are we sort of recipients of their recommendations?
That is a great question, Director Bragman. All these projects have been identified in the Fire Flow Improvement Program, itemized by year, back in 2012 when the program was reinitiated. So they're all set in bundles for every single fiscal year. So every single year, we always start from the first year and work our way progressively towards the end. So this is just the next set of lists of streets that were identified in the FFIP that we're proceeding with. There is some flexibility, as we've done in the past, whenever there's a paving project that we would accommodate and shift around some of these FFIPs just to get in before a municipality does a paving project, just to reduce costs on pavement restoration. But as far as all these lists of streets have already been pre-identified on the Fire Flow Improvement Program.
So Alex, they were identified working with the fire chief group, right? And
that is correct.
Meet with the same group annually to review the upcoming work and confirm that those are the relative priorities. So there's ongoing discussions.
Thank you, Ben.
Well,
that's absolutely true.
Okay, well, that's good to hear. I'd like to get a copy of the list that was agreed upon in 2012.
Sure.
If that's available, I would really appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Historically, when the program was first started, there were a few fire chiefs in the county who never got the message and didn't get the memo, and were behind the 8 ball and then came up belatedly. Are we fully caught up on that? I mean, is pretty much every fire department, every chief in the program, or do we have any that have a few years behind?
No, all of the fire chiefs within our jurisdiction do participate. So unless there's something that's slipping through the cracks on their end, as far as I'm concerned, everyone comes to the table with participation and comments.
And programs,
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, okay. Sounds like we're all caught up on that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Any other comments? Any public comments?
There are none.
Okay.
I'll move approval to the board.
You read my mind, Jack.
Okay.
Second, somebody?
I'll second it.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right, let's move on to number 4.
Do we want
Another
public
one?
comment on that?
I did public comment, Jack.
Oh, okay, sorry, I missed it.
There were none.
Okay.
Oh, actually, Roger Roberts just raised his hand.
Okay,
Is that okay?
okay.
Okay.
Yes, it's okay.
All right, go ahead, Mr. Roberts.
As you were talking about the scheduling of the work, the thought occurred to me that we now have attempts to engage in concentrating on wildland-urban interface locations. Has that been taken into consideration in this project planning with the fire chiefs? Has that been updated in that regard? Thank you.
Do you have any comment on it, Alex?
All these locations were definitely worked on with the fire chiefs. And as far as how that wildlife urban interface was accounted for back in 2012, I'm not too sure. But I do have a feeling that if there was a need for further discussion, the FFIP could be amended to rearrange or reprioritize some of these pipeline projects in concurrence with the fire chiefs. That's a good question to follow up with them.
Yeah, well, I would also add that I think it's close to 80% of our service area is in the WUI. So
Yeah.
most of them are already benefiting the WUI districts.
True.
Yeah, and that's a good point, Crystal. And the other thing to keep in mind is that this is just because it has a new name doesn't mean it's a new event, a new concept. This issue has always been there, and I'm sure the fire department was quite concerned about their ability to reach beyond the houses and actually do something at the WUI. Okay. Item 4, Sky Oaks Road retaining wall.
All right. Good morning, directors. This morning, Jake Miller will be presenting this item.
Morning. I'm Jake Miller, Associate Engineer in the Design section, and I'm here to present the item for Sky Oaks Road retaining wall replacement project. This project will replace the existing old retaining wall located on Sky Oaks Road, approximately 450 feet north of Bontempi Road on the Marin Waters watershed lands. Staff evaluated the construction traffic route for Pine Mountain Tunnel Tanks replacement project and determined that the log retaining wall on Sky Oaks Road is in need of replacement to facilitate the anticipated construction traffic. This contract will include the installation of a soldier pile wall with drilled piers, concrete lagging, and a guardrail. The project is scheduled to last 87 days with a completion date of September 30th of 2022. Engineer's estimate for this project is $210,000, and construction bids will be opened on June 21st. If all bids are acceptable, staff will make a recommendation for contract award at a future regularly scheduled board meeting. Staff recommends referral of this item to the board to proceed with the project. Any questions, comments?
Jake, I just have a question about the location. Is it towards Bolinas Road? In other words, is it before the gate to get into the watershed?
No, it's beyond the gate as you're driving toward Bontempi Dam.
Okay. And which
So
side?
There's a map. There's a map, Larry, in the. Right,
Yeah,
second.
I'm not great at maps, so
okay.
I'm okay at verbal. It's a little better.
So just before you get to the intersection with Bontempi Road, you might have seen there's like a larger pull-out area.
Yes, yeah.
So it's just north of that.
So on the left side of the road?
Correct.
Right.
I'll take a look. Okay. So, and the anticipated traffic is going to go from the construction site towards Bullfrog? Is that the question, the issue?
Anticipated traffic, yeah, for Pine Mountain Tanks.
Okay. Okay. Thanks a lot, Jake.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other board comment? Any public comment?
So far, there aren't any.
Okay. Going once, going twice. Okay, I need a motion to review and refer to the board.
So
would
moved.
make, and I'd second it.
Okay, thank you all. Okay, item 5, Barber Avenue Pipeline Replacement Project.
All right, well, last but not least, is Zach back at it bat again, so he'll take this item for Barber Avenue. Go ahead, Zach.
Hi, good morning again. I'm here to present the Barber Avenue Pipeline Replacement Project. The project will be constructed in the town of San Anselmo. The project will install approximately 440 linear feet of welded steel pipe to replace a 120-year-old galvanized threaded pipe. This project is in coordination with the town of San Anselmo Street Overlay Program. My engineer's estimate for this project is $150,000, and bids will be opened next week, June 21st. The project is scheduled to last 75 days with a completion date of September 18th, 2022. If all bid documents are acceptable, staff will make recommendation at the July 5th board meeting for contract award. The recommended action is for review and referral to a future regular bi-monthly meeting of the Board of Directors with the Operations Committee recommendation to proceed with the project. Any questions or comments?
So Jack, you get the award on this one, 1902. That's the oldest one I can remember seeing.
It certainly
in this
is.
replacement.
Yeah.
That's a lot of life out of a galvanized threaded pipe.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
I bet they're gonna get a great increase in water pressure after this.
I'm sure.
good to hear. So that actually was put in before the district was formed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is
Several
the
of
first
them
time we've
were.
done that. I mean, this is routine for us.
Yeah, very interesting. Okay, and we would go through our regular procedure, notify the San Anselmo Public Works, Town Council, all that.
Yes,
correct.
yes, I've been in coordination with the town of San Anselmo on this project, and we've sent out a preventive letter, and once awarded, we'll send out another.
Okay, it sounds good.
So is this the only piece? This is the one piece that's shown here, or is it the whole thing, the whole neighborhood that way?
It's just that small piece, Director. We, if you've driven past that area, the town in San Anselmo has actually been grading the road there, and they've been doing a full depth restoration, and our existing pipeline is very shallow. So that section has been called out to be replaced with coordination of the street overlay program.
Yeah, but Larry, yes, there is additional galvanized pipe in that area that is not being replaced. This is really just in conjunction with the paving project.
I see. That's what's triggering it, because obviously, and it's probably the same age, huh? Yeah. So, yeah, that's a tricky part. I guess the leak history is fine, huh? We're not experiencing problems.
Right. Yeah. If there were problems, we would have had it in our CIP program, but it's really, this section is being replaced in coordination with the paving project.
Opportunistic, really.
Right.
Yeah.
A wise move, but opportunistic. That's good. Okay. Any other board comment? How about public comment?
There are none.
Okay, I'll give my same warning, going once, going twice. Okay, we need a motion to forward to the board.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, thank you. Thank you all for your patience and your very valuable comments. And we're done.
Have a
Thank
good
you all.
weekend, everyone.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Yep.
thanks a lot, everybody.